time frame is generally when forensic examination and testing is usually completed. So given the fact that we are just now a month out from the homicides, and given the fact that the laboratories have had 4 weeks, I would expect either there is going to be some progress moving forward, that there has been some isolation of DNA samples. With that being said, it may not be positively identifiable to someone because, just quite frankly, they haven't been arrested, and so there's nothing in the system. But with that being said, the advancement of testing and genealogy workup.
Hey guys, so guess what? The power didn't go out, and I think in future what I've got to do is basically, if the power does go out, which is not a nice way to end a live, I can just sort of end the live on my phone, since I can't do it on my computer because there's no power. So I'll probably do that in future. In other words, allow the power to cut me off if it's going to cut me off, and then end the live. You've got to go back to StreamYard, but I can go on my phone. So I'll do that in future. Anyway, I'm sorry about that, but you just don't know. It was scheduled to go off, it didn't go off. So it's quite ironic that one of the last things I said in the live was that we seem to be in that sort of end-game period of the toxicology, and then just after I went off, I Googled latest news on the Idaho murders, and then this came up, and you had this expert literally saying why there could be progress in the investigation soon. Exactly what I'd said is it might be conditional on the toxicology, and also just trying to get through the tips and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to take you guys through 4 possible reasons why this case could be concluded very soon. Then I want to take you through some of what Fox News reported on what Kaylee's father said, and then I want to take you through what the sort of mischief that some true crime people have been getting up to. So those are the 3 boxes we want to tick in this analysis, right? I just want to thank you guys for coming back. I know that it was a little unexpected how prematurely the previous live ended, but thanks guys for coming back. Stephanie, good to see you here. Victoria, I haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. Is it true that the volume is low? Is that okay? Is the volume low for everybody? Terry, good to see you as well. And Susan as well. I did get your tweet, Susan. Zaneda, I haven't seen you for a while either. Good to see you. Iceland says, welcome back. Perfect timing. Sounds good. Okay. So one of the main reasons why, well, let's first look at the poll. What do you guys say? So at the moment, most of you say it's hard to say, but 45% say there could be an arrest any day now. So I want to deal with 4 reasons why an arrest could be announced soon. So the first reason is the crime scene has already been cleared. So law enforcement feel confident enough, even beyond that. Law enforcement are really done with the crime scene. They have done all the photography, taken all the samples. And if you think about it, it's quite soon. I mean, there's no reason why they could not hold on to the crime scene longer. If you think about it, the students have graduated. There's no reason why the cops couldn't hold on to the crime scene for another 4 to 6 weeks, right? Think about it like that. The students now, they've graduated, so there's no reason for them to be there. So why not just hang on to the crime scene for another week? or another 2 weeks, or another 4 weeks? Well, the answer is that they have what they want in terms of the crime scene. Does that make sense? In terms of the crime scene, in terms of the house, they have what they want, they have what they need. In other words, just in terms of the crime scene, the house, the investigation is complete. Right? Do you agree with that? Otherwise, they wouldn't have. I mean, they've given it back to, I guess, the owner. They've taken the stuff out of it, right? Which you see in this footage, and they didn't have to do it then, but they decided to do it then. And this is actually mentioned a little bit later in the same clip. Let me go to that part where she says,
of the 4 students, giving those items back to the families and essentially clearing this crime scene, which some have said is too soon. What's the rush? Does that indicate to you that police maybe have more information, they feel comfortable taking evidence potentially out of this crime scene at this point?
And to that point, that's exactly right. That is a tail sign that the police department, local, state, and federal, to include the FBI, is satisfied that there would be no need in the future to return with any concern.
So there you have it. So it shows actually in a way that that law enforcement are quite on top of this crime, doesn't it? Right? Doesn't it show that? So they're done with the crime scene. It seems like there's one loose end, which is the white vehicle, right? But anyway, that's the first reason why this case could be over really, really soon. A suspect could be announced really soon, any day now, literally within the next 2 weeks, right? As I said earlier, probably before Christmas. So the second reason, so the first one is the crime scene has been cleared. The second one is, think about the Kylie Rodney case. We are in a similar phase as we were when we dealt with the Kylie Rodney case. Do you remember what was going on? We were in that sort of place of, is it an accident or foul play? Law enforcement also said there are no suspects, right? Or we don't, in other words, I think at one point Jagger was inferred to be a suspect and they said, no, he's not a suspect. Remember that? And then I think it was mentioned by them that they are waiting for the toxicology, and then that's literally what happened. The toxicology was part of what looked like an abbreviated police report, and then that was it. That was when it came out, right? We're in the same place now. We are waiting the toxicology. Toxicology can take 4 to 6 weeks. I would normally believe it would take less time rather than more time. Sorry. But we aren't dealing with one victim here. We're dealing with 4. So what could have taken longer in the Kylie Rodney case is the less than ideal situation of the period that the body was in the car and the water and all of that. But that was only one person. In this case, they're 4 separate individuals. And there could be, in one of the 4 individuals, or even more than one, there could be an aspect that is somewhat unclear or inconclusive, and then you may need further tests. But even so, I would imagine it's not going to take to the end of 6 weeks. We may have a result by the end of this week, so we'll see. No. When we're talking about toxicology, we're not talking about the guests and the rest of that. There are tests possibly to do on things like DNA and that sort of thing, but that's different evidentiary testing. That doesn't necessarily take as long. I think what would take long is the toxicology. That's a system that one's got to go through step by step. Another thing that can take a while is going through phone data, that can take a while, depending on how active people are. And students tend to be very active in their social media and on their phones. So that's another thing. Another thing that can take a long time to sift through, which law enforcement acknowledged in this last update, is that you can have, they have a lot of tips that they need to go through one by one. And then DNA there can be complex issues with the DNA, but I don't know if it would necessarily take longer than toxicology. What is quite interesting is this expert does mention the genealogical aspect, which seems to suggest you don't necessarily need the person's DNA in a file. You can kind of do a how can I put it? You can get a good DNA profile in a way by inference. It's called a DNA inference. Looking at if the perpetrator is male, looking at whether he's, his nationality, that sort of thing, and so on and so on. Anyway, so the third aspect that makes it feel like we're in the final phase is the fact that a white Hyundai has been identified, but the owner hasn't come forward. Doesn't that suggest there's a problem with the owner? Now, think about this. Imagine if the driver is the perpetrator, and if that's the case, then isn't law enforcement in a way sending a message, we are closing in on you, right? So either that's a genuine message or it's a decoy. So if the perpetrator didn't drive this vehicle, the perpetrator may actually feel quite comfortable that they're not going to catch him. So it could be a decoy message, it could be genuine. If it is genuine, the fact that the owner hasn't come forward is not only suspicious, but by inference suggests that the perpetrator drove a white Hyundai, right? Now, that brings us to the fourth point. If it's true that the perpetrator drove the Hyundai, then surely it's a matter of time before tips come in identifying who it is. Surely someone knows someone who drives a white Hyundai. It's also possible the cops are playing that, sharing that, and sort of pretending that they don't have the information, meaning the driver of the vehicle, when they actually do know who the driver is. Perhaps by announcing the type of vehicle, they are exerting a kind of coercive control over the suspect. They don't name the suspect, they don't identify the suspect, but by identifying the vehicle, potentially may be a way of encouraging the killer to shelter in place, because otherwise if he comes out with his vehicle, someone will see him. So maybe it's a way of keeping the potential suspect in place so he doesn't drive around or move around in public. Does that make sense? Do you think it's overthinking that, or do you think that that is plausible? What do you guys think? Victoria, thanks a lot. I just thank you for making my days bearable. Thanks a lot, Victoria. Okay, so I think the giving back of the crime scene, I mean, they say actions speak louder than words. The fact that law enforcement have done that. And one thing I would like to do, if I was writing a book about this, one thing I would want to do is look at other crime scenes, the Ramsey home, the Chris Watts house, I guess Barry Morphew's home to some extent, but just a lot of crime scenes. Look at those crime scenes and ask the question, how long do they typically take to be released by law enforcement? Because, I mean, obviously, once law enforcement release a crime scene, they can never go back. And you kind of get the feeling the Ramsey home was, to some extent, given back prematurely, but also items of evidence were allowed to be taken, perhaps prematurely. For example, the Mindhunter paperback was seen in photos, but was never actually collected as evidence, which is quite interesting. Well, someone says they need to burn this house to the ground. I think if they just painted a different color and rename it, you know. So let me ask you guys a question, two questions. Or let me make this comparison. If you compare this case to the Kylie Rodney case, how are they the same and how are they different, right? So consider the following. In the Kylie Rodney case, you had young people, right? You had party goers, sort of anonymous party goers, but you had young people, and ultimately it sort of revolved around this idea, is it foul play or not? Is it an accident? And then next to that debate was, who are potential suspects here? And that caused certain people to become quite uncomfortable. Family members, law enforcement, yeah, right? So, and that was that case, right? So now we've got another case where there's no question that there was foul play. In the Kylie Rodney case, there was sort of this thing of, we don't really want to mention suspects. We don't want to talk about suspects. And ultimately, was there a suspect in that case, right? You might say there was, but there was nevertheless this aspect to, we want to protect the privacy of young people. Do you remember that? Now we are in kind of another case that is so similar. Young people partying and the law enforcement not naming a suspect. But in this case, there's no question that there's a perpetrator. So the fact is, there is a suspect. I don't mean law enforcement have a suspect, although I think they do. I'm just saying the fact is there is a person that committed this crime. That's not in dispute. The question isn't whether someone committed this crime, as it was in the Kylie Rodney case, it's who committed the crime. And that's why in the previous live, or the previous live to the previous live, I spent quite a lot of time talking about the what. What kind of crime is this? Because what is going to give you kind of an indication as to who and why. But if you don't have the what right, you're not going to get the who and why right. Also, if your why is, your motive is in the ballpark, if by looking at everything that's going on, the context, the timing, the basic fabric, you're getting a basic idea of the why, that may give you an idea of the who. And I think we are starting to feel like the who is likely a student, right? But the same issue applies here, that they don't really want us to speculate on potential suspects because their privacy needs to be protected. Until law enforcement are ready to make the announcement, they don't want suspects to be speculated on. But you can imagine that it's natural that people would do that. But law enforcement themselves have got to wait until they've got enough evidence that they can prove their suspect committed the crime. They've got to prove it. They may think that he did. They may suspect that he did, but can they prove it? And that's what this evidence gathering right at the end may be all about, right? So the other thing I want to bring to your attention is, do you think this crime was committed because of revenge or jealousy? And I think that's an article that has just come out now as well. I think it's this article over here. Somewhere along the line, something bad happened that pissed someone off enough to go after them. And then he says, retired Moscow police captain says Idaho killer was motivated by revenge. So that's a retired Moscow PD that's a Moscow PD cop, retired, that says, you know what, I think the Idaho killer was angry, was pissed off, and he was motivated by revenge. What does that tell you? It tells you that another cop thinks he knows who it is and that it's someone personal, something personal, and something that is related to the victims, which is what we've been saying kind of all along. But my question to you is, do you think the killer was motivated by revenge or jealousy? What do you guys think? What do you guys say? Caitlin Hobbs says, revenge. Maharaj says revenge can be the same as jealousy. Can it? I suppose it can. We're going to talk about it in a moment. Anne says revenge as well. Janine says they're both intertwined. That's quite interesting as well. Pauline says revenge. I've changed my stance on this. Vicky Lane says I'm leaning towards revenge. So Susan says those emotions are interconnected. Susan says rage, but no, it's between revenge and jealousy. And I think if you think about rage, which one is closer to rage, revenge or jealousy? That's quite a tough one. So let's look at the meanings of both these words. Here is revenge. I'm just referring to it because it's come up in the news media because of this cop. So revenge is the action of hurting or harming someone in return for an injury or wrong suffered at their hands, right? And yet it says spurned wives have taken revenge, public revenge on their husbands, probably on Facebook or something. Other words, vengeance, retribution, retaliation, reprisal, recrimination. It also means to inflict hurt for an injury or wrong done to oneself. I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you. That is uses a example there. Now, let me ask you like a really interesting question. Revenge means hurting or harming someone in return for an injury or wrong suffered at their hands, right? So would you say what happened in this case was someone hurting or harming someone? And I think you would answer absolutely. So by that same token, you could say, if this is revenge, is it a little bit of revenge for something small, or is it extremely harmful what is done? And by that token, does it feel like the revenge is extreme? The revenge is extreme because of a wrong that was also extreme, an injury that was also extreme. And I think that's where it gets quite interesting. When they say in return for an injury or wrong suffered at their hands, do you think that so this is really, I think, a very simple and very obvious question, but a very important one, and one that I think is very easy to miss. Do you think that the killer in this case was actually physically injured by any of the victims? Absolutely, you've nailed it there. Right? Perceived harm. So let me just say that again. Do you think any of the victims physically caused harm to the killer? Yeah, so Cynthia says, how dare you humiliate or leave me, right? So in other words, what we're talking about here isn't revenge or retaliation in a sort of quid pro quo way. It's not an eye for an eye. It's not you stabbed me in the chest, literally, so now I'm going to stab you in the chest. It's actually you stabbed me in the chest, metaphorically. You stabbed me through the heart, metaphorically. So I'm going to stab you through the chest, literally. And that's where it gets really interesting, because in terms of the criminal psychology, you need to be trying to intuit what that symbolic construct actually means. So who in the fabric of this case was stabbed through the heart symbolically? Not in a way that you think is being stabbed through the heart, or I think is being stabbed through the heart, or any of these victims think is that, but from the perpetrator's side. And that is where I think the surviving roommates can provide very valuable intel and insight, is they can say, you know, there was someone who was really, really sensitive. There was someone who lashed out and took things really the hard way, and took things personally when that's not how we meant it. There was someone who was in the sort of place of adding insult to injury, and it wasn't actual injury, right? And weren't there other reprisals in the past as well? In other words, didn't someone say spiteful things on social media? Didn't someone make threats or something like that on social media? And then this was the execution of those threats, because that often happens. There are words often before deeds, right? Thoughts before words, words before deeds. Stephanie says, I think more than one may have felt that way, but only one acted upon it. Christopher says, I also don't think the killer was expecting to get away with it. I don't know if the killer thought that far. I think the killer just was very animated and aggravated and angry. I don't think he was thinking as far as that, but I do think him cleaning up after himself is trying to do that. It could be someone we are unaware of, definitely. But it could also be someone that they, given enough thought, could be aware of. James says, I think maybe one, but the greater wound was of ego. Separate point, but rejection has been shown to activate the same parts of the brain that react to actual physical pain. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm in a wounded place myself. Me and my girlfriend have been broken up for a couple of months now. Our relationship wasn't working out anyway. And just the other day, I was thinking, like in a rhetorical way, well, what do you want? If you were back together, would that actually make you happy? And I was like, no. But nevertheless, I'm in a wounded place where I sort of feel I miss this, I don't miss that. But nevertheless, it's a wounded thing. But am I physically wounded from that? No, I am actually physically wounded right now. My knee is actually still hurting a little bit, unfortunately. But that's something separate. But that's something that's quite important. If someone is psychologically wounded, think about what animals do when they're wounded. They can lash out. A lion can be very, very dangerous if it's wounded and it can't get away from you. And so at a certain point, it feels trapped, and then it will lash out when it feels that there's no other option. This person probably felt cornered in a sort of psychological sense, that they lost everything, and they wanted revenge for that. That the loss wasn't necessary, or the loss was cruel and insensitive, or something like that. So that is revenge, right? So is what we're talking about here revenge, which is what the expert refers to here, motivated by revenge from the Moscow PD, or is the operative emotion or feeling jealousy? Now think about what jealousy opens up. Thoughts or feelings of insecurity, fear, concern over relative lack of possessions or safety. Jealousy can consist of anger, resentment, and all of that. Now think about jealousy, and here it is being associated with anger. So I don't know, like my my gut tells me that it's not associated with revenge in the sense of you hurt me, now I'm going to hurt you. I think it's more related to jealousy in the sense of jealousy and envy. You've got a great life, you've got a great fairy tale life. I could have been part of it, but I'm not for whatever reason. You could have made my life so much nicer, but you didn't. And not only that, I can see how wonderful your life is. I see it on social media. So think about the perpetrator looking at someone's social media. What do they feel? Think about it's a young perpetrator, it's a student. What do they feel the strongest looking at social media? Revenge feelings. I'm not saying revenge is like that's not a factor whatsoever. I'm just saying, isn't jealousy more operative here? Looking at someone's social media and someone seems so happy and they've got a new car and they've got a new job and they've got a new life and everything's been going swell. Well, it hasn't been for me. And so I'm jealous. And your very existence invalidates mine. Your happiness, your endless happiness, your endless, going from one friend to the next, one happy boyfriend to the next, or whatever, I don't know, whatever, shows me how unhappy I am, how miserable I am, what a loser I am. And so because I'm jealous, I want to get rid of the source of that jealousy, you. If it's revenge, I don't know how revenge works on 4 different people. But if it's jealousy, I can see how jealousy can be applied to one person. And you might say, you know what, it's not just you that I'm jealous of, all of you in that house having such a good time is driving me crazy, right? Or I suppose you could say, so if it's all of you, why not the 2 students at the bottom? But you guys that are or were my friends or whatever, something like that. Joe Huck says, were the 2 girls gay? That comes up a lot. We don't know. Do you think, I must say, if you take that aspect, that the girl, I don't think the girls were gay, but if they had a gay moment or they had a gay experience, whatever, and that excluded someone, I guess, for the time being, you can imagine feelings of jealousy and revenge. I'm jealous because you're with someone else, but I also want revenge because I'm emasculated, right? Teresa says bisexual is possible. Look at the Daily Mail picture. Must I look at the Daily Mail picture? That one or that one? So this is all current now, them emptying the house out. That's the expert, the retired Moscow PD captain, Paul Kwiatkowski. Are you saying I must look at that picture? Not really sure. Are there any others? Well, that's just them emptying out the house. Okay. Heavenly Cloud says, who knows nowadays? Yeah, it's kind of different these days. Greg says, lots of young ladies who are close friends experiment with intimacy, not at all unusual. I agree. I agree so much with that comment. First of all, it's not unusual, but also it could have set someone else off. It's not really that unusual, but for some people it might be, or it might feel unusual. It can also be simultaneously like exciting, almost like sex on steroids. The idea that seems to be, how can I put it? The idea that seems to be being communicated, or a spiciness that is added to these photos. Look, it's not just me in this photo, it's me cozying up to another pretty girl, ... right? And whether that's done playfully or suggestfully or whatever, doesn't it put that whole idea of, well, you're a pretty girl that I like, doesn't that put that on steroids for a young 20-year-old guy, right? Doesn't that also ask other questions? I'd like to have sex with you. Could I have sex with you and ... right? I'm just saying it adds a level of excitement way beyond what's already there. But then when that sort of playfulness becomes, what's the word? The real world intrudes, it could be quite a shock. Oh, okay, we don't want you part of this thing. It could be all fun and games. Actually, we are in a serious relationship and we don't want a guy to be part of that. That can be not very fun. It could be a lot of fun, the idea, actually, do you want to come and join us? That's really exciting. But how exciting is it? Actually, don't come and join us. This is actually quite serious. I'm serious about this girl, not about you. That can be not fun. And that you can have real feelings of jealousy and envy that can also lead to a kind of frustrated anger. And I think one does have to ask, is this rage killing, this sort of rampage killing, kind of sexual frustration? Is that actually what it is? Is that actually what we're dealing with? Brett Creek talks about violent phobia, yeah. That's true. That's true. But just think about the John Benet Ramsey case. That was also, you might say, what happened there? I just don't understand what happened with John Benet Ramsey. Well, it was a very sexualized little girl. Did that have an impact on the crime? If you took that aspect away, would the crime have happened? It's hard to imagine it would have. In this case, if the people in this house were all sort of very old grannies and like, on their last legs, could you have imagined an attack the same level of opprobrium? I couldn't. Timmy, I'm going to have to put you down. Sorry, Timmy. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on now to a little bit more dealing with the police statement today. I wanted to deal with that in more detail earlier. Are you guys happy with me to do that, or do you feel like that's been done? You've watched it maybe on other channels. Do you want me to go through that police statement? This one. Do you guys, sorry, this one. Do you guys want to go through this, or do you feel like it's been done? Okay, yes, please. Okay, so let's go through it. It's nice having a little bit of time. Thanks a lot, Cash. Thank you. Let's do that, and let's get started.
Lanier, I'm a captain with the Moscow Police Department. I'm in charge of the Operations Division. And today is December 12th, Monday, and I want to give you an update on the King Road homicide investigations, at least the information that we have to this point.
Now, what's I think already quite interesting about this is the way that they control this press conference. This isn't a press conference. This is a statement that they are controlling. In other words, they're not in front of a sort of a bank of reporters, or he isn't. And so it's not a scenario where once he's finished with his statement, reporters can ask him questions. So they are literally controlling the narrative in that sense, where they don't want to be asked any questions. Isn't that also something that you could say is possibly indicative that we're at the very end stage of this case, where, I mean, bear in mind, they've been allowing questions all along. And here, perhaps almost at the very end, they don't want to be asked certain questions, and they don't want inferences to be made out of answers or non-answers. They just want to make their statement. They're being extra careful. Don't you get that sense? Okay, so I'm just saying this statement is very different to a lot of the ones that have preceded this one, which I think is quite interesting. Okay, let's continue.
Over the weekend, investigators still continued to sort through numerous tips, calls, and online tips in regard to this investigation. There's been a lot of questions about the white car that we've been interested in. We're looking for that car because we believe through our investigation that that car was in the area during the time of the murders. And we also believe that the occupant or occupants may have seen something. They may not know they have seen something. So we specifically want to talk to them, and we want to know who they are and what they might know or might be able to contribute to the investigation. Over the weekend, investigators have sorted through and prioritized numerous tips. Some are tips that came in earlier and we've been working on. Other tips are new and are relevant. It's overwhelming sometimes with the amount of information that comes in on these tip lines. So our analysts have spent hours sorting through and trying to come up with the most relevant tips first for the investigators to follow up on.
Okay, so I think I touched upon this in the previous live that I did. He's saying that they're actually overwhelmed with information. And so doesn't that kind of give you a sense of confidence that it's not, I think in the Kylie Rodney case, do you remember the spokesperson said no one has come forward? So there was something about that no one has come forward to say that they were aware of Kylie's last movements or something like that. But you can kind of almost understand that given what happened, that Kylie was one of the last to leave, and she drove off the way that she did, right? Probably going to get some people saying, no, that is not what happened. But if you take that scenario, in this scenario, it's sort of, you get the feeling that there's no lack of information, that there are a lot of students. You can almost imagine that, bear in mind, these are not school kids. And I don't know if there's such a big deal with underage drinking. I'm not saying that it's not a deal at all. And also drug use, but you know, drug use for school kids, and I'm just saying that I think there are far more people that have agency in this situation that can potentially contact authorities and tell them things. It's not only the students, it's their relatives, it's their parents, it's the professors. It's all of this is within the fabric of the campus. So it could be cleaners, it could be taxi drivers, it could be grub street vendors, it could be chefs, it could be waiters, it could be, you know, like throughout that entire fabric. I mean, who are all the people? It's not like that just came into contact with someone at a reservoir. It's not just that. It is, what do you know in terms of this entire setting of the university, right? It's that entire dynamic that they're trying to explore, which makes it a much bigger pool, right? So just imagine all the tips that can come in terms of a student community of something like 20,000, right? Even if it's a fraction of that, it could be thousands. And I mean, I think we have heard that it could be 2,000 tips, as Pauline says, bartenders as well. bosses, co-workers, friends, right? And so all of that are tips that are coming in. And can you imagine if people are giving in their archival cell phone footage? It is going to take time to get through all that. And so why on earth would you as law enforcement say, hold back the sort of tsunami of stuff we're getting, let's announce our suspect, right? No. Let's deal with all of this stuff that has come our way, sort through all of it. Once we're done with that, we can fine tune our story. Doesn't that make sense? Jacqueline says, in 1998, when I was on campus, each and every sorority sister partied and used drugs on occasion. Yeah, I mean, that's just another thing. All the sororities, all their members probably are being encouraged to come forward. Ashley Lee says, good to see you. Good to see you as well. Okay, let's continue.
They have re-interviewed some of the folks we've interviewed earlier in this investigation to clarify information. Sometimes when new information comes forward, the people that we've spoken to beforehand may have new insight on that. So
Okay, so what do you think that could be about? So he says we've re-interviewed. Who do you think that they've re-interviewed? Who are possible candidates that may have been re-interviewed? I've got a few ideas. Let's hear what you guys say. Who in your opinion are possible candidates for re-interviewing based on how information has sort of ebbed and flowed? Who do you think has kind of been re-interviewed? I'm just writing down a couple of my possibilities. So let's see what you guys say. I tend to agree with all of you talking about the roommates. I think it would be crazy not to speak to them exhaustively. I think the roommates are going to give you some of the best intel from anybody. They know the inside of that house better than anyone. The vibe, the dynamics that were going on. Is there anyone else that said roommates? Not too many of you have said roommates. Thanks, Karen. That's nice of you to say. Songbird also says roommates. So the roommates, I think, would be very important to interview and re-interview to get the inside track of their friends, of what is really going on in the personal life of Kaylee. Who was she seeing? Make a list of those people. What is really going on with Maddie? Were Maddie and Jake like a established couple and nothing was going to come in between that, or was that in flux at some point? The roommates could also probably conclusively address and answer the question whether something was going on between Kaylee and Madison, right? And whether that had any impact on anyone. And obviously that would be quite a private thing. And maybe initially they wouldn't want to talk too much about that, but later on they would feel, well, do we want to catch the killer or not? The roommates could also talk about, did Ethan Ethan's a guy. Did Ethan have any argy-bargy with anybody else? Did Ethan humiliate someone during a drinking contest or anything like that? And then Xana, the same thing there. What were the dynamics with her? How did all four of those housemates get along with one another? How did they get along generally with others? Was there any sort of romantic person that was romantic with Xana and then romantic with Maddie, or romantic with Maddie, then romantic with Kaylee, or something like that? Was there some kind of sort of mixed up romantic role or partner scenario that can lead to uncertainty and jealousy as well? So I think the roommates are a big aspect to interview and re-interview. They could also talk about things like sleeping arrangements, not only of the victims, but also who tended to sleep over at the house. What were the party dynamics? Also, what is the last time they had a party at that house? These are questions I would ask. What happened at the very last party at 1122 King Road? Take us through that entire event. What were the highs and lows? What was good, bad, and ugly? So what is that aspect? If you a student from the University of Idaho and you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I attended some of those parties, I know some of this. Well, think about what you remember in terms of just things that stood out, right? And then maybe you also want to contact law enforcement with a tip. Just think about the people that you bumped into that kind of registered with you. And maybe in the beginning you didn't notice anything, but maybe as we talk about it, you notice more. So I think the roommate's very important in terms of that. Was there someone who was trying to do something, have more parties or start more parties, or wanted to join certain parties but couldn't? Was there some kind of state of flux where something was going to happen and it didn't happen, right? That's like on a broader scale. Was there also something like that about to happen with a small group of friends or couples, or someone who liked someone, that someone had a crush on someone and certain expectations, ... And did someone talk about that? Did someone say, wow, this person is so obsessed or whatever? So anyway, who I think would need to be re-interviewed many, many times are the roommates. Someone else I think would probably need to be re-interviewed is the chef. I mean, the chef was the guy who just came forward now. Bear in mind, he was interviewed right in the beginning. He said the police came to his door, asked him certain things, and he said, I think he said at the time, I didn't hear a scream, I didn't notice anything. And then a couple of weeks passed, and now he does remember that. Well, you can imagine, would need to be re-interviewed. Tell us about the scream. Was it a woman screaming? Did it sound like an argument scream, or did it sound like a life and death struggle kind of scream? Was the scream cut off? So interesting, in the John Benet Ramsey case, the woman said that the scream she heard sounded like a child, and that the scream lasted for a while and then was cut off, right? In the Meredith Kircher case, as far as I know, a neighbor, like in an upstairs flat across the road, they also thought they heard a scream, right? The scream is important because it can show two things: whether someone was activated and awake, and so they weren't killed in their sleep, they were conscious, and also potentially the time that this crime occurred. And thus what feels like the time that it occurred could have been close to 4 a.m. because that was the time Inan went to sleep, right? I think police would also want to re-interview is his name Inan or Inan, to check his credibility. They might say to him, well, didn't you say on Facebook that there were no screams? So how do you explain what you're saying? And so he might say in a believable way that, you know what, I heard lots of screams at night. Screams with parties are normal, but I mean, I did hear a scream at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and look where I live. Does that make sense, kind of thing, you know? So do you guys agree that Inan should also be interviewed again? And then I agree Joe should also be interviewed. Joe provided quite a few sort of pointers that he said that the police didn't know about in terms of the timeline. But Joe could also think about things in a different way. Joe was in the bar with them, and he was sober, so he'd been in a really good position to notice what was going on. And then he could also talk about what was going on in general with the girls. Were the girls flirting? Were the girls being teased? Were they teasing? With how many guys appeared to be interested and sort of making moves, right? Also, what was Hoodie Guy doing at the bar? And was he even at the bar? But if he was at the bar, what was he doing at the bar? Was Hoodie Guy drinking at the bar? Was Hoodie Guy talking at the bar? Was Hoodie Guy talking with them? How long was he talking with them? Was Hoodie Guy dancing with them? And then what is his thoughts at this point in terms of that aspect? Because he said, I think he's a solid guy. So they might say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Janine says, I think the killer would have started by doing that. Well, that is not the case, because the coroner said they were stabbed in the chest. They weren't stabbed in the neck. They weren't stabbed in the lower regions. They were stabbed in the chest. The chest is this area, right? That's what the coroner said. No, not head wounds, not neck wounds, chest wounds. A voice for hope says, you can't scream if you're sleeping, but you can scream if you awakened in pain. I mean, you can scream instantly, unless you are simultaneously muffled, like a pillow is put over your head when something is done. You know, that's also possible. I mean, I think you've got to imagine the crime scene being a bedroom, and you've got to imagine that being of use to the killer. What can you use with a bedroom? Well, you can use a pillow to muffle, but you can also use blankets and sheets to some extent clean up a victim and to wipe yourself down. Yeah, that's exactly right. Thanks for that. The coroner specifically said not in the neck, so it's important to know these details. Okay, so let us continue with this statement.
It does often seem like we're backtracking, but we're really just trying to get the most important details and the best timeline that we can come up with. We have literally an army of analysts who have been sorting through videos that have been.
So I must say, I find it quite interesting. Let's just get his eyes open. It's going to look funny with him with his eyes closed while I'm talking. But I do think it's really interesting that he's talking about the timeline 4 weeks later. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the timeline, I mean, in the Madeleine McCann case, the timeline was adjusted after 4.5 or 5 years, if you can believe that. They'd initially thought something happened at like 9:20, closer to 9 o'clock, and after 5 years they adjusted the timeline to closer to 10 o'clock. So there's nothing wrong with 4 weeks later, almost a month later, acknowledging that they are still trying to fine-tune the timeline. But that is also why, as I said earlier in the previous live, it really makes me quite upset to hear that the coroner only arrived there at 5 p.m. One thing you really want to try and fine-tune is the time of death. And the longer you take to arrive at a crime scene, and the John Benet Ramsey case is also quite a good example of that. John Benet probably died at 1 a.m. or somewhere around there, right? On the day after Christmas, on the morning after Christmas. She was found at 1 p.m. and the coroner only arrived at something like 8 or 8:30 p.m. Why did he take so long to get there? But I mean, the time of death in John Benet Ramsey case is part of why it's potentially quite a hard case to figure out. In this case, it's not a big town. Someone's not on holiday. Just go to the crime scene. You don't need to interfere. You just need to establish, in a sense, time of death of one victim. You don't need to do it with all four of them. And I think maybe in a way you could say it's not necessary to be, it's not such a big deal. The fact that the girls ate before they died, that is going to fine-tune the time of death anyway, because you just look at where the carbonara was in the gullet, in the gut. So that's going to, in the same way with John Benet, look where the pineapple was in a way, and the state of decomposition. That's going to give you some indication. But there's another problem with this, is the longer you take to get your blood samples and so on, the more you are potentially muddying aspects like blood alcohol. Now, blood alcohol, there is a way to quite accurately find out what it is, but you would rather deal with the post-mortem tissues earlier than later, right? So that's one aspect that I find quite frustrating. I suppose law enforcement may have thought, you know what, we already know what the time of death likely was, although how can they really say that? I don't know. It just bothers me that the coroner took so long to arrive there. Anyway, in terms of the timeline, Joe has helped them a lot with the timeline. The roommates would obviously help quite a lot with that as well. And Inan, the chef that heard the scream, could also help with that. All of that is helping to make the timeline more concise and more concrete, right? The timeline in this case can be quite complicated. What did Ethan and it's the timeline for 4 individuals. What did Ethan and Xana do for 5 hours? That's quite a complicated timeline on its own. You could say, well, they were just at a bar, maybe, and maybe it's as simple as that. But also, how much did they drink? Who did they interact with? Personally, I don't think that's going to take you anywhere, but you need to investigate that anyway. Then you need to look at the timeline of the 2 girls. And then I think you can even take the timeline much further. You can say, you can take it back 4 weeks or 6 weeks. That's the unknown aspect. In the Chris Watts case, the magic ingredient was saying, well, you need to be aware that there's an affair going on for about 5 or 6 weeks. So you need to get the timeline for at least that long. So in this case, you don't know exactly what is the the subtext going on where you need to be paying attention to the timeline. The timeline may be absolutely specific to Saturday night, or it might be going back 6 months or a year or back to someone's childhood, right? James Houghton says the 5-hour void is loud. Ray Amaro says, do you think the killer would have a social media history or is totally isolated from it? I think it's very unlikely that he doesn't have a social media history at all. And that, of course, is right next to the phone data stuff. So text messages, calls, maybe to some extent financial transactions, but all of that kind of data. Even you could say browsing history. I mean, what about browsing history on laptops, PCs, whatever? So all of that information. And then besides that, the social media, what was going on social media, who was misbehaving. And that can be quite hard to find when people are deleting their social media or you don't know actually what you're looking for. Because there's a lot of noise and nonsense. So how do you know what's a red flag in social media? I mean, there is so much silliness and so on. How do you know that's a scary statement? And that's where I think, if you're if you were a University of Idaho student watching, a big area that you can play a very important role is if you were just on the social media networks and you remember some arguing on social media or some bickering or some nastiness on social media, that may have been scrubbed. So if you remember that, or maybe you remember a pattern of someone making insults or someone criticizing whatever it is, or making threats, then that's something that may have disappeared, but you may have seen, and then that's something that law enforcement could definitely be interested in. Cash says, check your photos from the night too, or the background. But I mean, basically check your own phones, go through your own phones, go through your pictures of them and look at who's in them and what you're seeing and what you're feeling and what stands out, and make notes. Anne says, why does Ali not say where Ethan and Xana were during those 5 hours? As far as I know, they were at the sorority bar. I don't think it's a mystery. Is that correct? As far as I know, it's not unknown. They spent 5 hours basically in the same place. That's how I understand it. Adam says, why did it take 2 weeks to remove the vehicles? I don't think the vehicles were a priority. I mean, the vehicles aren't the crime scene. Yeah, I mean, I can't say it really beyond that. Can't really say it beyond that. That's how I understand it as well. I don't think it's a big mystery. That's sort of how I understand it. Yeah, frat party. But I think you do have to say, okay, so, but what happened at that frat party over 5 hours? And that can be where it can be quite, I mean, some people looking at the Grub Street truck will say that is completely normal behavior. I don't see anything abnormal there or unusual. I disagree, but I can see how you could say potentially maybe it is all totally normal. There's nothing suspicious. Now imagine taking that psychology to the frat party where you say, what are we supposed to see here? They're just a lot of drunk kids and they're having fun and they're dancing. What are we supposed to notice here? Are we supposed to notice someone who's not dancing? Well, there's always someone who's not dancing. We're supposed to notice someone who's particularly drunk. Well, there's always someone who's particularly drunk. Are we supposed to notice someone who's sober? Well, there's always someone who's sober. Are we supposed to notice someone who doesn't have a girlfriend? Of course, there's someone without a girlfriend. So can you see how it can be very like there's a wall of noise, and you're only going to get your insight from students. You're only going to get, and to some extent, from access to phones and messages. Alan says, do a suspect poll. No, I'm not going to be doing that. Stephanie says, technically, the Uber driver was the last person to have contact. That could also be a very good person to re-interview. Have you remembered anything since then? Did you go straight home? What time did you drop them off? What did they say during the drive back? Were they giggling? Did they say anything about the person that they were just interacting with? Did they eat in the car? Did they mess in the car? How did they pay you? Who paid? Etc. etc. Okay, so let's continue with this this announcement.
Submitted through the FBI.gov Moscow upload site. Those videos are from all over town, gas stations, and specifically the area around King Road. We've been trying to use those videos to garner new information. As you can imagine, there's hours and hours and hours of videos, so it does take a lot of time. I want to talk a minute about safety. There's all over town, a gas upload site. Those videos are from all over town, gas stations, through the FBI.gov Moscow upload site. Those videos are from all over town, gas stations, and specifically the area around King Road. We've been trying to use those videos to garner new information. As you can imagine, there's hours and hours and hours of videos, so it does take a lot of time.
Okay, so again, I don't want to get him sort of...
I want to talk a minute about safety.
Okay, so that's quite interesting. He says we've got hours and hours and hours. Those are literally his words. They've got lots of footage that is, it appears to be of a CCTV nature. And I must say, of late, I've been really astounded by the power of CCTV. CCTV seems to be the resource that many of us underestimate. We think it's DNA is the smoking gun, or DNA is the ultimate, or we think it's going to be about cell phones or cell phone pings. But CCTV is increasingly evident in virtually every true crime case that we're covering these days, because there are cameras everywhere. And I mean, besides cell phones, there are literally cameras everywhere. There are cameras in front doors. There are of ordinary residences. There are cameras in business premises. There are cameras in ATMs. In fact, an ATM camera picked up Patrick Frazee in terms of his movements, right? An ATM camera. But I mean, just think in the Kylie Rodney case, it was a CCTV camera that picked up her final moments as well. The Liza Fletcher case as well, CCTV. Delphi murders, CCTV. It's really a fantastic resource, but it's also extremely labor intensive. So again, if you're saying, why don't they just announce a suspect? Why don't they just do it? Well, CCTV can involve, depends on how much you're going through, but it can involve tens of thousands of hours, right? You can follow a suspect, or you can follow someone's movements over a long period of time. Or you can try and find something that you don't know is there, also over a very, very long period of time. And I can tell you, when I got the discovery in terms of Chris Watts, I've got given the Chris Watts' entry into a convenience store, and I think he's just in there for 1 or 2 minutes, and you end up spending, even though you know kind of what you're looking for and where it is, it's easy to spend an hour just trying to find those few seconds where the person passes in front of the camera and there he is again. It's incredibly labor intensive. And that's when you know what you're looking for. When you don't know what you're looking for, then it's even more labor intensive, because you're looking for a pattern. You're looking for something that you don't know what you're looking for. So it's possible that the hours and hours and hours they have looked for something that they don't know what they're looking for, and now they know what they're looking for in terms of the white Hyundai, and so now they've got to go through it again looking for the white Hyundai. Is the white Hyundai local? What does that white Hyundai do? Where does it normally fill in gas? Where did it fill in gas last? Can you find out who the driver is from a gas station? Question mark, spend 1,000 hours trying to answer that question. In the, I can't remember her name now. I actually feel quite embarrassed that I don't. What was the other girl who went missing at the kind of the same time Kylie Rodney did? What's her name again? Someone help me out. Who was the other girl who went missing at the same time as Kylie Rodney? Yeah, Lorette says storefront businesses, ATMs, gas station. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thanks very much, Sean. Yolissa Fuentes. I mean, her last movements were also picked up by CCTV at a garage sort of forecourt area. So I think it would be so important just to get all the sort of garage forecourt footage from Moscow and just go through it, all of it from the 24 hours prior to the crime, and just look at what's in there. But especially approaching Sunday morning. That's a lot of work, though. It's a lot of work, because one gas station you may have absolutely nothing, another gas station absolutely nothing, and another one absolutely nothing, and then the next one something, and that something might just be a flash. In the Kylie Rodney case, they probably went through gas station footage only to find that, well, there's no Honda in any of it. But that's all the work that it took to establish that. Okay, shall we continue? So now he's going to talk about safety, and I think he is quite right in saying this. You shouldn't only be safety conscious when a crime has been committed. You should always be vigilant. If there's anyone who can tell you that it's a South African, there are crimes taking place all the time. You guys are going to be shocked when I tell you this. 72 people are murdered every single day in South Africa. I wonder what the daily rate is in America. Let me just see if I can find it. USA daily murders. How many people are murdered in America each day? Don't know if it gives that number. It looks like in 2016 it was 47. So almost double that amount in South Africa. But now bear in mind, South Africa is 7 times less population than America. So in any event, if you want to be crime conscious and safety cautious, South Africa is the place to do that. But you should do that anyway. When I was making that analogy about there's a killer on the loose, right? And making the analogy of a lion and gazelles, it really made me think when I went to Botswana. I actually went with my American co-author. When you go into Botswana, you literally have lions that are unfenced, and you in a wild area where if you're sleeping, lions can come into camp. Sometimes hyenas drag little children by their feet out of tents. So you literally do have killers on the loose. And that is actually the way we used to be. We used to be very vigilant as human beings because our lives were at risk. Now we assume our lives aren't at risk, and so we aren't vigilant. But we should be. We should have a certain level of basic vigilance. A couple of weeks ago, I was nearly killed by a car that just sort of didn't see a traffic circle and just went straight across it and crashed right in front of me, something that you just wouldn't expect. And I felt like I need to do something, but it was moving so fast, wouldn't really have mattered if I jumped or take your marks, get set, go. But I think that issue of you need to be vigilant applies so much the moment you get into a vehicle. The moment you get into a car, you have the ability to take someone's life by mistake and vice versa. And just by being vigilant, you can save your own life and you can save someone else's life. So especially in that way, be vigilant. I mean, when you are driving, it feels like a reality that there's a killer on the loose. It's just a matter of time when that's going to happen, right? Anyway, let's get back to this. So yeah, he's talking about safety.
There's been a lot of speculation about what is the safety to the public right now, or the risk to the public right now. I would just like to add that we should always be vigilant. Certainly we should be vigilant now, but we should make that a way of life for us. We should always be walking with our head up, sticking to lighted paths, and walking in groups if we can. And in addition, letting people know when you've arrived home if you have not made prior arrangements. This is not an indication of a specific elevated risk, but something that we should be vigilant with just in our daily lives. I want to let everybody know that we are.
So what I find quite interesting about that, I don't know what you guys think, but do you notice that he's almost saying there isn't an elevated risk here? He's saying be vigilant, but he's almost saying be vigilant in general. Doesn't that kind of give you the sense that the cops have this handled? They know, and to me, it's kind of hard to believe. I mean, someone who's killed 4 people is still out there, right? So to be quite sort of, let's say, fair about it seems kind of strange. But do you notice that he sort of says something about there's not an elevated risk? Let's try and go back to that.
Elevated risk, but something that we should be vigilant with just in our elevated risk. Indication of a specific elevated risk if you have not made prior arrangements. This is not an indication of a specific elevated risk.
So he says there's not a specific indication of an elevated risk. So you kind of get the feeling that there's not really a risk. So how on earth can you say that? Now, do you remember in the John Benet Ramsey case, the same thing came up? The police sort of said, there's not a risk to the public. But that's kind of assuming that they know who is the perpetrator and why the perpetrator wouldn't be a risk, right? Isn't that the same case here? That they know the perpetrator, they know where the perpetrator is, and for whatever reason also know that that person's not a risk. Thanks for that, Susan. But the question is, how many per day? Michelle says, I think he's trying to say it in a way to normalize vigilance. Yeah, I think that's true. But you could also say, I don't think there would be anything wrong with this, to say, we really want to encourage people to be vigilant. In a way, he is, as you say, normalizing it. It's hard to say, like, is there anyone in chat here that is on the ground in Moscow that can say, or was on the ground in Moscow, who was in Moscow, who can say the atmosphere there is quite tense, that people are panicking, or is that really the case? That you want to make things appear to be normal? Suppose that's an interesting comment. I feel the same way. And I would also feel like if there's a killer on the loose, it's a little bit like when you go to a beach, like I did, and there's a board saying great whites frequent this beach. I'm going to be more than vigilant. I'm going to be a little bit concerned enough, perhaps not to want to surf. And ultimately, I didn't. I don't think it's just vigilance. I think someone who's actually killed in a gratuitous way is a bit of it's more than an elevated threat. So what's that all about? It's a little bit difficult to figure that part out. What do you guys say? Thanks a lot, Marisol. Thanks a lot for that. Thought Criminal says he's talking about a future reference, something to be learned. Okay. Kimberly says, what would toxicology have to do with anything? Well, in the same way as with the Kylie Rodney case, you could have a situation where someone cynically, what do they call it? Spiked their drinks. You could have that. You could also, I think you would want to know, as the investigators, you would want to know what level of alertness, what level of consciousness did the victims have when the attack occurred? Were they how can I put it, totally passed out? It's like you're not just sleeping, you passed out. Or were they, who was very passed out and who wasn't? It could also give you an indication if someone was more or less sober, how much they were capable of fighting back or fighting back effectively. There could also be one of those four individuals is far more intoxicated than all the others. And for whatever reason, we don't know, but for whatever reason, that's the individual that was targeted. That individual was perhaps targeted for sex, and maybe that individual was targeted because that person was particularly insulting or obnoxious or something. So that could be a factor. It's not a very direct factor, but it adds to what you know. Sparkly Unicorn says toxicology will be very important. Well, where was that? Sparkly Unicorn, okay. Yeah, there is that potential. I don't know whether it's very likely. It's always a possibility. But you actually heard the coroner. I can play that recording a little bit later. You actually hear the coroner saying in her interview that she doesn't think the toxicology is relevant to, I think, the manner of death. So I think what she's trying to say there is nobody overdosed, that nobody died because they drank too much. So in that sense, it's not relevant. I do think it is relevant. It is a question you want to address. In a similar way, what happened with Anne Hirsch? What is the toxicology? Very interesting with Anne Hirsch. I don't think they found any alcohol in her system. So she wasn't drunk. She was high. I think the toxicology could also show that maybe certain substances are in the girl's system that you might be surprised about, such as fentanyl or whatever. In other words, certain drugs that maybe you wouldn't have expected otherwise. Tamara says, I'm Dutch, but living in South Africa for 5 years. Well, I'm also Dutch, but okay, my brain cannot cope with the fact to be so careful and on your guard always. Okay, well, you don't have to be on your guard very much when you're at home if you've got security in place. But yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on where you go. But yeah. Hungry Helmet says there was no drugs found in Anne Hesch's system either. As far as I know, there were. As far as I know, there were. See if I can confirm that. So can you see I'm quite au fait with stuff? Can you guys see that? That's quite interesting. They didn't impair her or cause her death. That's quite interesting. So what the hell was going on that she was driving the way that she was driving, right? Okay, let's go back to our press conference. Let's go back to that.
But something that we should be vigilant with just in our daily lives. I want to let everybody know that we are still 100% committed to solving this crime. There's a lot of information to sort through, and the information keeps coming in. And not all of the information is relevant, but you don't know if a tip is valid until you take the time to examine that tip and see how it relates to other information that you might have. We have teams in Moscow, Salt Lake City, and in Virginia, as well as other locations across the country. And we're prepared to do interviews and follow up on information at any point, anywhere. The ISP and FBI investigators, along with the Moscow Police Department investigators, includes dozens of analysts, tip line operators, and others.
So what's quite interesting with that is he's saying that we are capable of interviewing people at many remote destinations, and he actually names a couple of places. What that seems to show is bear in mind, students have now gone home. They're not in Moscow anymore. What that seems to be saying is we can come and talk to you if you need us to, and then let's just go through those locations again.
And in Virginia, as well as other locations across, relates to other information that you might have. We have teams in Moscow, Salt Lake City, and in Virginia as well.
So I don't know if that is something specific or not, but doesn't it seem a little bit interesting to say, well, we've got teams in Salt Lake City and Virginia, or am I missing something? Is there a Virginia and Utah? I'm assuming there is. Let's just have a look. You guys have probably given the answer already. Virginia, Utah. I mean, I know there's Virginia, the state. There's Virgin, Utah. So isn't he talking just in general about Virginia? Let's listen again.
Don't know if a tip is valid until you take the time to examine that tip and see how it relates to other information that you might have. We have teams in Moscow, Salt Lake City, and in Virginia, as well as other locations across the country. And we're
So it's quite interesting that he highlights Virginia, isn't it? Why do you think he's highlighting Virginia? How far is Utah from Virginia by plane? It is almost 2,000 miles. So what is the significance of Virginia, do you guys think? FBI. Kellyanne Garber says, love how you're breaking this down. Thanks a lot, Kellyanne. Mona Spirit says, I think when I saw the way Jace acted towards the girls, okay. Virginia is FBI. Okay, well, okay, that does make sense. Quantico, Virginia. Okay, let's continue.
prepared to do interviews and follow up on information at any point, anywhere. The ISP and FBI investigators, along with the Moscow Police Department investigators, includes dozens of analysts, tip line operators, and others, and they're working around the clock, 7 days a week to sort through the volumes of information. MPD has detectives, support personnel, and a communications team to try to keep everything together, but it is still a daunting task. The FBI, their investigators are ready at a moment's notice at any place in the country to go conduct an interview should the tips and leads take us there. And the Idaho State Police has, besides working on the investigation, had several uniformed troopers in the area to help with safety concerns around the city and on the University of Idaho campus. And just a quick reminder, please stick to official news releases for information. Tracking down rumors and quelling rumors about specific individuals or specific events that may or may not have happened is a huge distraction for investigators, and oftentimes is the result of social media propagation. And it is very, very frustrating to investigators and hard to stay on track.
So that could also be a possible reason why he's done it this way, or why they've done it this way, is to limit the rumor mongering and sort of gossiping if you have journalists and the media asking questions. And I suppose you could also have folks from social media also asking questions. So I think it's to the police want to talk to the public, and they want it's kind of the police want to investigate and they want to talk to the public, and they're trying to limit the fuzziness that comes out of the sides of that conversation from the media and from social media. Right? That seems to be what's going on. It is contained. Okay, let's continue. We've got another minute and 15 seconds of this before we go into the next thing. We're going to deal with Kaylee's father's statement and then social media's mischief after this.
Finally, I just want to add that we do have a lot of information, and we are specifically keeping that information safe. We're not releasing specific details because we do not want to compromise this investigation. It's what we must do. We owe that to the families, and we owe that to the victims. We want more than just an arrest. We want a conviction.
So I think that's very big, is him saying we want more than just an arrest. Actually sounds like they are actually capable of making an arrest right now. They actually probably have a suspect right now, but they don't want to just arrest that person. They don't want to satisfy the public demand and thirst for, I don't want to say justice, because that is what they want to do, but they want to be able to deliver justice. There's a difference between giving the public what they want and being able to actually deliver justice at the end of the day, right? I get a sense of confidence from this statement. I don't get a sense of desperation and pleading for tips. I get a sense that they've already got quite a lot. They probably do want more for their case, I guess. What is the other thing that he said? Let me just go back a little bit.
This investigation. It's what we must do. We owe that.
He says we've got plenty of information. We've got a lot of
We're
information.
not releasing a lot of information. And we add that we do have a lot of information. And we are specifically keeping that information safe.
Okay, so that is not so hard to understand. We do have a lot of information. We're not going to tell you what it is. What do you think it means when he says we do have a lot of information? It means we have a lot of evidence. I think it means we have a suspect. We can't tell you guys right now. We're not ready to do that. Kelly Sharp says not giving information also protects the parents. If Ali told them who they thought did this, what would the parents do? I mean, it works like this. Law enforcement can't say, I mean, think about it practically. Law enforcement can't say, we think Jerry Maguire committed this crime. What do you think is going to happen if they say that? Everyone's going to go and find Jerry Maguire. The police can only say when they've arrested Jerry Maguire, when they've got him, when Jerry Maguire is safe in their custody, only then, as they did with Richard Allen, right? They can only say after they've got him in their custody, where they can protect him from the public and take control of the aftermath of that. It's only at that stage that they can say, this is our suspect. They can't say, guys, you know what? We suspect Jerry Maguire and Frankie Goes to Hollywood and someone else as well. We think it could be one of those people. What do you think is going to happen if they do that? In other words, they can't play open cards. If they write about one of those three people, they're still wrong about two, and you could have a court case where, and you would have a court case where they would say, yeah, but you were 66% wrong for a while. So So can you see it? Just don't be surprised and don't be frustrated by the fact that law enforcement do things that the way they do. It's to protect the legal process. It's to give them the benefit of first move advantage. They decide when they're ready. All of those things. Thanks a lot, Barbara. Thanks a lot for that. So we're going to deal with Kaylee's father in a moment, but can you see how Kaylee's father is a little bit unreasonable? On the one hand, you can totally sympathize with him. You can totally feel, yes, we can understand you want justice. Yes, it's frustrating. If we're frustrated, if we are concerned, you can imagine how much he is. He's heard graphic descriptions, poor man. He's not seen his own daughter. She's been snatched out of their lives, right? Obviously, they are going to be frustrated, angry, traumatized, all those things. But I don't know whether social media should make him the poster boy or the poster man of we are not happy with law enforcement and we've got a right to be not happy. What, how can I put this? What is more desirable, an arrest now and a failure to convict later, or an arrest later and a successful prosecution when it comes down to that? I think the answer, don't you think the answer is obvious? He is feeling desperate, but I think you've got to try and remember that it's not personal. It's not someone being a coward. It's the way all of these cases go. Think about how long it's taken to prosecute the Laurie Vallow case. That's not someone being nasty to you or playing games. To some extent, prosecuting is a game, but it's a game that is played to win. It's not something else. Think about the Barry Morphew case, where what happened over there. Think about the Chris Watts case, where we didn't know what was happening, and then the prosecution sprung on us the fact that Chris Watts had confessed and was throwing in the towel. But if they'd revealed to us earlier what Chris Watts' intentions were, you can imagine the fuss his own family would have kicked up, right? Yeah, the prosecution is more important. Ray says, too many questions. Was the front door open? Was roommates' doors locked? Ray, I'm not sure what the rest of you guys think, but as far as I am aware, the front door was open. There was a news article that's just come out now, or in the last day or so, where the police chief said, it was news to me. I've only just heard that the front door was open. And a neighbor said that the door was open since 8:30 that morning. Well, he noticed it open at 8:30 that morning. So the door was probably open at least for another 4 hours, 3.5, 4 hours. Yeah, front door was wide open. And I think that to me confirms the killer entered through the front door, maybe not have exited through the front door, but could also have exited through the front door. You never know. I think entered through the front door. That's how he entered without breaking anything. And then once inside, he could have exited through the sliding door. Anyway, I think the fact that he entered through the front door but didn't exit through the front door is why that there are two surviving roommates. If someone was woken up in the middle of committing the murders, then you can imagine he may not have finished what he started. Maybe he did intend to kill the other two, but he was interrupted, and so he then left because things were getting a little bit out of hand. But maybe he assumed that the surviving roommates should have or would have woken up. Okay. Cash says Fox News quoted unnamed neighbor who saw, yeah, there you go. Okay. Okay, let's get through the last bit of this thing and then move on to Kaylee's father.
We're not releasing specific details because we do not want to compromise this investigation. It's what we must do. We owe that to the families, and we owe that to the victims. We want more than just an arrest. We want a conviction. We owe that justice to Xana, Kaylee, Madison, and Ethan. And finally, I would just like to remind anybody with information, you can call the tip line at 208-883-7180. And that is directly to the tip line office in the FBI. There's been some frustration about having to wade through the tip line, but remember, this is not the only investigation in the country. So please be patient. We want that information. Anything could break this open for us. And then also the email tip line is tipline@ci.moscow.id.us. Thank you for your continued patience in this investigation. Thank you for your continued patience. .id.
I just want
It's
to play
tip
the
line
email
at
address one more
CI
time.
dot
Sorry, let's just.
for us. And then also the email tip line is tipline at ci.moscow.id.us. Thank you for your continued patience in this.
Okay, so that's that. Now we're going to deal with the statement made by Kaylee's father, and the few little questions around that. I brought this up very quickly in the previous live, this aspect, where Kaylee's sister said, this reporter got bad information and we're working with our lawyer to get this removed. This information was not given to anyone at Fox from our family. So I think bearing that in mind, so we're going to look at this Fox News article, bearing in mind that it may be bad information, right? Just keep that kind of in the back of your mind, right? So one of the things that came out in that article is this article. It's this one here, published today, December 12. Father of slain victim says she had big open wounds, right? So one of the things that comes out of this article was that apparently the coroner told Steve Gonsalves that the perpetrator was a strong individual, right? So what does that mean? How strong? Male strong, strong for a male, or just male? What does that actually mean? So these are some excerpts from the article. He said, I got outraged by them not just coming out and saying this was a woman or a man. So he's trying to exert pressure on the authorities, like tell us what's going on, give us information. And on the one hand, it's something you can understand, but on the other hand, it's not how it works. In true crime, patience is a virtue. In prosecutions, patience is a virtue. The law does take a frustratingly long time, even when it's moving quickly. Then he also says they should be looking out for a sadistic male. Do you think that that's true? I think that that is just self-evidently true. They are probably looking for a sadistic male, but I've got to say, a lot of young men are sadistic, and sometimes even women as well. A lot of young people have a cheeky sense of whatever, where they take pleasure, they laugh at the misfortune of others. It's not always evil, but it's often a dark sense of humor, whatever you want to call it. But a lot of young people are quite sadistic in a way. If you look at the computer games that people play, they're sadistic. So when you say a sadistic male, what are you really talking about? How sadistic compared to someone else? And I think you can maybe apply it to things like hunting. Someone who hunts in a particularly bloodthirsty way. That's one possibility. Someone who plays particularly bloodthirsty computer games. Someone who possibly, in terms of sex, likes a particular sexual experience that is unpleasant for one person, you could have that as well. But it does look like we're talking about a sadistic male. You could also have a sadistic male that is emasculated, who's kind of a baby, and the thing that you might think that is a very aggressive, hulking Rambo, instead is actually sadistic in another way. Is a small, sly, weak sadist. It's actually in that sense. That's quite a good point, Alison. Quite a good point from you. So Then we go on to, he also said, I don't think stabs is the right word. It was like tears. And I must say, when I saw that, that was when I thought, I don't know whether this is legitimate. This is from the Fox News article. So apparently, Kaylee's father spoke to the coroner, and then he sort of leaked, or somehow that information has been conveyed to Fox News. But when the coroner spoke, she never spoke about slashing. I think Ashley Banfield actually asked her that. You guys remember? I think Ashley Banfield asked, what kind of injuries are we talking about? And I think she asked, was this a kind of a slashing crime? Was it that gratuitous? And I can't quite remember what the answer was to that. I think it was, but it wasn't slashing. Is there anyone that can try and find me that interview? Because I did try and find it. Where, let's see if I can quickly find it now. Ashley Banfield, News Nation, Idaho coroner. See if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Let's see what she answers right here. Okay, let's bring that down a little bit. Okay. So that's coroner. Idaho college students were likely sleeping. So let's just wait for this to load. I wonder if, okay, yeah, so here it is.
Were early in the morning, so it seems likely that maybe they were sleeping.
Were they found in separate areas of the house?
That hasn't been disclosed yet.
Can you tell me, when you say that they might have been sleeping, were they found in beds?
Yes.
And so can you tell me if there were multiple stab wounds per victim, or were these sort of, individual lethal stab wounds that may have been less in number, but more in lethality?
There were multiple stab wounds, yes, on them. So, and
Were there, go ahead.
And most of them had just like one that was the lethal stab wound. Yes.
So if you, it is quite clipped and limited what she's saying. It's not like a free flow of information. You get the sense that she's counting her words, that she's trying not to say too much, but she does say stab, and she says there's clearly a lethal stab. There's clearly in each victim, you can see that was the lethal injury, right? But there's no mention whatsoever of anything besides the word stab, which is why it kind of stands out that this version in Fox News refers to a quote apparently from her, Kathy Mabbitt, saying, I don't think stabs is the right word. It was like tears. And then he says big open gouges. She said it was quick. These weren't something where you were going to be able to call 911. So, I think that's an inference. I do think that the type of injuries they sustained caused them to die quite quickly. If they didn't die quickly, they would have been able to cry out and eventually someone would have heard them. So, and also it makes sense that in order to, and as horrible as this sounds, in order to kill the next person, in order to progress through that, you've got to finish that person off, right? It's a horrible thing that we're talking about, but just in terms of in order to effectively go from the one to the next, you've got to do it effectively. In other words, you can't make a little nick on someone and that wakes them up, and then you work in a very ineffective way with another person in terms of the facts of this murder. It sounds really distasteful to talk about it in this way, but you know what I'm getting at. So she's saying that there were very clear sort of stab wounds into the chest, whereas what is coming out from Kaylee's father are other words like tears and gouges, and that just makes one wonder what's going on with that. You kind of feel like it was a slow news day, and wasn't this information that was commented on some time ago? Don't you have that impression? It's an old interview that's been rehashed or recycled or something. That's my impression. Then there are a couple of things that we learned that we didn't know. I want to come back to this interview, but there's some other things that we learned that we didn't know. There are photos of Kaylee's room with no blood on the bed. That makes sense. And I think it was from that Kaylee's father inferred, I don't think he knew this for a fact, but I think he inferred that because there's no blood on her bed and her windows weren't closed, to prevent people from looking in, it wasn't a crime scene, Kaylee's bedroom. And as a result, they must have been in the same bed. I think that is an inference he drew, and I think it's accurate, but that's how I think he made that inference. I don't know whether he saw the photos, but he says there are photos of Kaylee's room with no blood on the bed. So that's quite interesting. And then also, he says victims died quickly and did not suffer. He said he's not convinced. Yeah, I don't know how you can say dying of a stab wound, you didn't suffer, and you died quickly. I mean, maybe you died quickly, but you definitely did suffer. And I used this in the title. He said, it was a hell of a battle going on down there. Well, I think there was a hell of a battle going on with at least one of the victims. And that definitely suggests suffering and shouting. Definitely. When you say a victim died quickly, how quick is quick? Do you think they died in 5 seconds? I don't think so. I don't think any of them, as horrible as this sounds, died in less than 30 seconds. So think how long that process is from the beginning of it to where you die, where your life force dissipates out of your body. Think how horrible and how eternal that feels, even if it's 1 minute. It's excruciating. And so we shouldn't minimize that. You know, you shouldn't, you don't want to sensationalize what these victims went through, but you must also not minimize it. You must be real about it. They did experience pain. They deserve justice, but they also deserve the truth to be told. They deserve the pain that they experienced to be acknowledged. They also deserve for their killer to be brought to justice properly. What is properly? Well, during the right time frame. So, Shane, there have been quite a few people saying this, but the coroner said there were no stab wounds to the neck. So that's not the case. Stephanie, good night. Thanks for joining us here. The coroner said there were no, she was asked. Maybe it'll come up here if we play the rest.
Can you describe what that one might have been?
But they were to the fatal ones were to the chest area or the upper body area.
Were there, and I only ask this because it sometimes determines what kind of a crime this was, a crime of passion, a random crime, a fight, a struggle. Was there, were any of them slashed? Were any of their necks cut? Or were these all puncture wounds?
Well, it was a pretty large knife, so it's really hard to call them puncture wounds. And they were definitely stabbings. And I mean, it has to be somebody that's pretty angry in order to stab 4 people to death.
Okay, so did you notice, well, in that particular clip, she is specific that it was stabbing and not slashing. And I'm not actually sure if there's another version of that where she talks about the punctures to the neck. Let's see if I can find that one. I'm pretty sure that there was something like that. This was also 151. Anyway, if anyone can find that, just let me know. I can't seem to find it. I do know, I don't know how I know, but I know that there were no wounds to the necks. Yeah, upper chest is her only clarification. Well put. Hungry Helmet says, stabs to the chest, would they feel like they were drowning? It's a combination, I think, of being unable to breathe and possibly your heart being injured. So yeah, it would feel like, besides being extremely physically painful, it would feel like an elephant is sitting on you. And at the same time, there'd be a sense of dizziness because you're losing a lot of blood at a very, very dangerous rate, right? Yeah, that is what is established, chest and upper body. So can you see how this Fox News thing seems to be a little bit questionable? What came out today? So that's as far as I'm going to take that. Now I want to deal with mischievous YouTubers, right? What do you guys think? Do you think YouTube has behaved in their coverage of this case? Do you think YouTube generally behaves in high-profile true crime cases? Do you think, it's not just YouTube, it's also Facebook, Reddit, forums, TikTok, whatever. Do you think true crime is respected and liked by law enforcement? Ray says, could the neck be considered upper body? No, I think neck is neck. I don't think neck is upper body. That's in my opinion. Kelly Sharp says, social media doesn't behave. Okay. So SW5 Plus says, YouTube true crime is that. Okay. So I want to talk about, and I'm not cottoning on to this after the fact. I was very aware of this before the fact, right? Right. I'm aware of a lot of other YouTube creators. I'm aware of those that I respect. I'm aware of those that I don't believe are credible whatsoever. And ironically, they tend to have very, very high subscriber numbers, right? What can you say about that? Somebody on a particular channel that I've never seen before, I was watching what he was saying, and it's really true. He was saying, this was in the past, he was criticizing a particular channel, and it was interpreted as jealousy. Well, your channel's smaller than that channel, so whatever you're saying is just simple jealousy. And that is, it's very hard to get out of that thing, because yeah, you are a smaller channel and you are criticizing a bigger channel, but are your criticisms valid or not? Let's have a look at the poll here. Do you believe there'll be an arrest soon? 64, most of you say hard to say. Only a third say any day now. I must say, I think it's going to be within the next week or two. I believe that quite strongly. I guess we'll see. Thank you to the almost 1,500 of you who voted. I appreciate that.
WordTune is your...
Okay. So where did I write that section about? Oh, here it is. Okay. So 2 YouTubers, I think you know who they are. And I do want to ask chat not to, the idea is to talk generally here. So it's the same idea that law enforcement have about suspects. You don't have to name them. Same thing here. I'm going to be talking about actual YouTubers, but I'm not going to name them. And I want you guys not to do the same as well. You don't have to name the people we're talking about. You just need to be aware of what is going on, right? I think we all know what is going on. So 2 YouTubers have recently outed someone for putting out fake audio purporting to be screams from the Idaho students, right? And the amazing thing with that, when you pay attention to it, this is a little bit like true crime, investigating true crime. True crime, trying to find out if true crime is lying, trying to find out the evidence that someone used or covered up or whatever. It's like the, I don't know, the weird alternate reality of true crime. But anyway, you can actually find the original person who made those screams. You can hear how her voice is similar to the recording. And then you also can tell that the sound is a little bit different. So you may remember, especially the folks on Patreon may remember that I actually mentioned a particular YouTuber. I mentioned him without naming him. And then I was specifically highlighting that he was showing, or he was making this claim that there was all this blood inside the home, inside 1122. He was making just sort of a flippant saying, look at all the blood running down that door in the kitchen or whatever. And I was thinking, yeah, but that's not blood. That's sort of cracks in the wood. And look at all the blood on that shoe. And I'm like, well, that's the color of the shoe, whatever it was. And that's not, if it was blood, you would have evidence markers right there, just as you had evidence markers elsewhere in that image. But anyways, making these statements, and that was kind of what I was highlighting. And in that same video, he also made the statement about the audio, right? The audio. And then you kind of had to think to yourself, I don't know if you guys did you guys think to yourself, if you were fighting for your life, if you were literally stabbed, a sharp object was stuck into you, would you say the things, would you be able to say things almost like you're having a conversation as you heard in that recording? It just, to me, wasn't credible at all, right? But nevertheless, I don't know if you guys know this. This is the part that's quite sort of ironic and weird. Some YouTubers thought, wow, this guy's got an exclusive scoop. I'm going to repeat that because I also want views, right? In other words, some YouTubers were echoing, repeating his thing because they believed it and because they would get a lot of views, only to find out actually this is a con, but these are true crime channels, right? So anyway, what has happened now is this particular channel that put it up has, let's just have a, I just want to have a look at where he is right now. See if I can find him. I'd just be interested. Let's just have a look. Okay, so yeah, he is, looks like from 250,000 subscribers, he's only shared 5,000, which is like a fraction, right? It's a fraction. It's really not a lot of people, right? And by the way, this video I'm making, I'm not saying go there and unsubscribe, right? I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to cancel him, right? Shane says, thank you for reading our comments and your attention to these important crimes. Merry Christmas. Thanks a lot. I'm simply commenting on the where we are in terms of the true crime community. So despite what has happened here, and if I ask the question, I say, do you think the true crime community are up to mischief? Do you think they're misbehaving? What do you think? Why do you think law enforcement in every single press conference, and not only in this case, in the Summer Wells case, in the Kylie Rodney case, in the Delphi case, it seems like in every single case, are like up to here with social media. They're up to here with fake stuff, with gossip, rumors, misinformation. It's always that, right? Do you think that it's not true? Do you think that when law enforcement say social media are creating misinformation, that is not true? Or do you think social media is creating misinformation, purposefully creating distorted, untrue, like purposefully untrue? I think sometimes people pass on things by mistake, but there definitely are creators who cynically put information out there that's fake, it's manufactured fake, right? Do you believe law enforcement when they say that there's misinformation in social media? Terry Dean says, misbehaving is such a nice way to put it, yeah. Pauline says, I can still subscribe to someone and think for myself. Okay, yeah, that's fine. But this is the point, is what I find quite interesting. This particular person edited a Daily Mail article. I don't know if you guys know this. So this particular person who put up the fake audio edited a Daily Mail article. He edited the, what do they call it, the HTML, in order to insert his own text, giving fake credibility to his own work. So in other words, it's a little bit like, let's say I want to say the sliding door was locked. Let's say I want to say that. I want to prove that the only way the killer could get in was through the front door. Let's just say that's what I want to do. And I take some kind of news article, Fox News, Daily Mail, The Sun, CNN, New York Times, whatever it is. And I go into the HTML and I then type in that HTML just on my side, in a way that it sounds like it's authoritative and it's from the source and it's part of the article. And I write, authorities have now said the sliding door was locked, right? And please don't quote that out of context. I'm just using it as an example, right? I don't know what's more disturbing, the fact that a YouTuber showed how this can be done, or the fact that a YouTuber did this. Because showing how this can be done actually just shows the rest of the true crime community how to fake things if they really want to, right? But think just about the conceit that we're talking about. So I don't know what your opinions are, and I'm sure they varied. I don't know what your opinions on how credible is the mainstream media. How credible is social media? How credible is this YouTube channel? How credible is that one? But think about the conceit that we're talking about here. Think about the following. You take a mainstream media article, in this case, the Daily Mail, you insert your own text, giving fake credibility to your own work, but by putting it onto another platform, and then you cite that as your source. As I said, I don't know what's more disturbing, doing this or another YouTuber explaining how it was done, which could lead to more fakery by other people. But this is the conceit. The mainstream media is fake, so you go to social media for the truth. But then what social media does is they refer to a manipulated mainstream media article as their source. And if you were none the wiser, you would think the mainstream media was fake news. So what this ultimately is in this instance, in this particular example, is fake crime trying to hijack the mainstream media for kind of reverse credibility so that it looks like he's providing an exclusive scoop. So there's clearly the more obvious conceit of a channel dedicated to spotting and exposing lies and liars while doing the same himself, right? So what do you guys think about that? Like, what do you think about a YouTuber who's basically saying, I'm going to use the mainstream media to give myself credibility? Don't you think that's an admission, A, that the person thinks they don't have credibility, and that in order to get credibility, you need the mainstream media? And you might think, no, I don't really see that. You might think that, but guess where most YouTubers get their information from? It's derived from the mainstream media. It's guys like Brian Enton that are on the ground, and reporters that are on the ground, and cops that are on the ground. They are gathering the evidence. They are doing the hard yards. Someone like me sitting in South Africa, I'm Googling. And obviously some people are better Googlers and analysts and interpreters and collators of this information than others are. But the best investigator is someone who's doing it firsthand, picking up the evidence, looking at it, examining it, talking to people, someone who's there. That's the best investigator. You can have investigators like Lou Smith who just look at photographs, as he did in the John Benet Ramsey case, or someone who looks at a case file. They can also be very, very good investigators. But think about what we're dealing with YouTube sleuths and online sleuths. They rely heavily on the mainstream media. So now if you want to create fake news, you can fake a mainstream media article, and that then gives you your fake news. But then who do you blame? Well, then you say, no, but the source of the fake news is that mainstream media article. No. If you didn't know how he was doing it and you didn't know the circumstances, you would think that, oh, that Daily Mail article, that's fake. But they actually contacted the writer of that Daily Mail article. Did you guys know this? They contacted the writer and they said, do you know that this is in your article? This is his name, Sean Cohen, right? Can you guys see that? They contacted this Daily Mail writer, Sean Cohen, and they said, did you say this in your article about that and that and that? And he said, no. Fake news, yes. Tampered. In other words, yes, my article is tampered with. That is deliberate distortion. That is true crime shooting itself in the foot. That's true crime cynically cheating for views while pretending to be caring about the truth. Now think about also what we're talking about. Putting up fake screams that are purportedly recorded by a witness theoretically discredits the witness, because you can ask the question legitimately, is this witness trying to cynically monetize this crime with his so-called evidence? So it calls into question that aspect. then it also, what it does is it makes a mockery of the victims because you're putting up fake screams as the real screams of the victims. You are replacing the real life trauma and drama and agony with something that you just borrowed from somewhere else that's got nothing to do with it. In other words, are you really sympathetic to these people that you are trying to champion their cause? Or is this just a very, very shallow exploitative exercise? I see quite a few people have stopped watching, but this is actually quite important to think about. Thanks a lot, Bundy. It's quite important to think about. What else do I want to say in terms of this? I guess when you heard the so-called screams, did you guys hear it? Didn't you have a gut feel it was fake to begin with? When someone is stabbed to death, screams don't sound like that. The mere idea that there was a recording in the first place coming out 4 weeks later. So it's like, you know what? I didn't think anything of the screams, but I actually did record it at the time. And then when the police knock at his door, did you notice anything? Oh, well, by the way, I did make a recording. But he doesn't mention that. He doesn't give it to the mainstream media. He doesn't give it to the cops. He gives it to a special chosen golden boy YouTube channel. And the other part that's quite scaly and quite sort of cynical is in the article where apparently someone is saying that this is how the recording came about. It doesn't really provide the source. It doesn't say the neighbor said, it just is there. And one of the easy, I'm a photojournalist, so I know all about formatting. One of the easy ways you could see that that was fake is you just look at the Daily Mail often have every single, they're not paragraphs, everything, every single sentence is like a separate paragraph. It's like sentence, space, sentence, space, sentence, space. And this guy's highlighted text that was his own text is all like 5 lines of a paragraph. That's not how the Daily Mail write things. It's just not how it's done. So I think, do you guys know what I'm talking about, or do you guys want me to Jay Alspec says fake immediately. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, or do you want me to put a link to one of the videos dealing with the fake thing in chat? Do you guys know what I'm talking about, or do you want me to put the link in there? Car Key 51 says, I knew it was not connected to that actual night. Good for you. Alison says, you'd think that would be illegal. Brits Creek says link, yes. Okay, so I'll put this link in.
Join Discovery Bank and experience the most.
Okay, so let's put this link in. And so that's one channel that's covered this. And then there's another one that's also covered it.
Well, the context of it look wrong.
And then let's put that in, okay. Okay, what else did I want to say about this? So I think you must remember the following. It's very, very seldom. Let me ask you this question. How often do you think social media, YouTubers or whatever, have an exclusive, like where they break some kind of news in terms of the true crime context? How often do social media have an exclusive where they lead with a story, and then law enforcement might catch up, and also the mainstream media. How often have you seen that happen? What's your response to that? Let me say that again. How often do YouTubers and social media, how often do they break a story? How often do they have exclusives? Susie says, never. So if you think about the interview room, do you remember the interview room and the Summer Wells case? Those were legitimate exclusives where he interviewed Candace Wells and Don Wells and went into the house. And what is the other thing he did? He also spoke to Macbeth, aka Hunter, right? All of those were exclusives, which caused his channel to grow fantastically because he was getting content nobody else could get hold of, right? So those literally were all exclusives. That's from the interview room, right? I'm trying to think of another example. Another kind of example is Adventures with Purpose, finding Kylie Rodney and filming them finding Kylie Rodney. That was an exclusive. That was something law enforcement couldn't do. And that was something the mainstream media was sort of looking on, and obviously all the social media as well. That was an exclusive as well. That was a huge exclusive, right? Those are real, but kind of rare exclusives. You far more often get exclusives from law enforcement where they say, this is the situation, whatever, we found the door open, this is the situation. We're making an arrest. That's where you get the exclusive from. Direct from law enforcement or sometimes from the media, right? But it's very, very seldom, it's very much less often from social media. As soon as there's a exclusive from social media that is not carried over by law enforcement or more particularly the mainstream media, that's telling you that mainstream media don't think it's credible at all. So if you didn't know anything else, so if you saw that a certain creator made a video about a recorded scream and you didn't know anything else, all you would need to do is wait for the mainstream media to pick that up because it's newsworthy. If it's true, it's newsworthy. If it's true, it's also evidence-worthy in terms of the case. And yet, did anyone mention that? No. Why? Because they didn't regard it as credible. Why did they not regard it as credible? Well, because it wasn't credible. So when you have one YouTuber making a statement that nobody else makes, nobody else repeats, that should be telling you something without any other information. What else can I tell you? I think there's a sense maybe that maybe you might say, wow, true crime are really growing up. They are, so someone has misbehaved and someone else has wrapped that person on the knuckles, right? But I would predict what will happen is after a few days or weeks, everything will be back to normal. Amnesia will set in and people will shrug their shoulders and everything will be back to normal. That's my prediction, right? So you might kind of want to congratulate yourself. Wow, social media are really growing up and telling the truth and holding one another accountable. Kumbaya, right? The flip side to what we're talking about is kind of cancel culture, which is someone did something that they're not supposed to. Yeah, they're not supposed to do it. But I'm going to out that person. Are you outing that person because they did something wrong? Well, I hope so. Or are you outing that person because they're a rival and a competitor? Because that's actually an agenda there. And then it's actually kind of a bit nasty what you're doing. It's not because the person was dishonest. It's because you stand to benefit from outing them. So I think you've also got to look at who is canceling and who is outing someone. Are they next in line, kind of thing, right? Because I think cancel culture is waiting in the wings. And you may notice I never mention YouTubers' names, not even in this analysis now. I could, and it's not like there wouldn't be anything wrong with it in the sense of it's fact and it's others have done it and it's not, there's nothing that is in dispute about it. Thanks a lot, Mary. I do like to try to be non-sensational. But what I'm trying to get at is you might be doing cartwheels saying, well done, true crime, you know, thank you. And I did thank these channels myself for doing this. But there's a difference between addressing fake crime and trying to cancel someone. There's a big difference between that. And you'll notice I never mention YouTube channels' names because I'm not trying to cancel anyone. I'm a YouTuber myself. Also, I don't want to get cancelled, right? And cancelled, you can get cancelled for doing nothing wrong. You can get cancelled for doing something wrong, and you can get cancelled in a way by mistake as well. And the reason is I do this for a living, and I'd like to continue doing it for a living. And I'm sure whoever you are doing it for a living or whatever, and want to continue doing it for a living. As soon as you bring in cancel culture, well, then it becomes a race to the bottom. And a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, and it's going to become a bickering fest. So rather than YouTubers either canceling one another, whatever, the best people to deal with this are you guys. You, my audience, their audiences. The best people to punish lying and manipulation and distortions are you guys. You guys address and what's the word? Alert and what's the word? Confront the misbehaving creator on his own channel, like in the comments, like, why did you do this? Are you going to do it again? Whatever it is. In other words, you hold them, I'm not saying you, I'm saying the collective you hold them accountable. Otherwise, if creators do that, you're just going to end up with cancel culture. What you really want is the person, I mean, there's the saying, greed is good. Well, if you can use greed, the greed of the creator against him, where you say, you know what, if you continue misbehaving, I'm not going to support you, then he might start to behave. So isn't that the best way to bring about a good change rather than a kind of culture of creators witch hunting one another, right? Do you get what I'm trying to say? In other words, hold your creator accountable. If I say something that's either not true or not accurate, you can do that with me. And some people did when I said, what did I say? Kaylee didn't pay for her meal. And although that was something I'd read somewhere and I eventually found the source, you guys were right that it does look like she did pay. But I'm just saying in a general sense, hold your creator accountable, and that's going to change his behavior, right? Do you guys agree with that? Because how can you have true crime creators lying to you about how truthful or not criminals are? Just think about that. Do you really want to waste your time? Like, how can you have true crime creators manufacturing things, distorting things, sensationalizing things in an area that's all about finding the truth so that there can be justice? It's making a mockery out of that if that's what's going on. And that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be made a mockery. That's why I say when you cover true crime, you need to cover it with a certain amount of gravitas and seriousness. It's not entertainment. It might be interesting, but it's not a party. It's not a circus. Laughingstock says, what's your source? I'm not sure what you're referring to there. Lucy Day says, it's meta true crime. Yeah, I guess it is in a way. Yeah, you have to self-police. But I'm just saying it's getting worse and worse. It's getting easier to manufacture and make things fake. YouTubers are finding, sometimes you find it out by mistake. You assume something, and then it's not true, but that assumption leads to a heck of a lot of views. And then the temptation is, well, maybe I must stray into that area. And who can resist that temptation? So, I mean, it's really up to you guys to say true crime needs to be true. So like if you say, okay, what rules do we need to follow? Quite simple, tell the truth. Be clear that you're telling the truth. Say where you're getting your information from, how reliable is whatever is that you're saying. What is your track record? How well did you do in that case, that case, that case, that case? And if you're wrong about something, are you able to acknowledge that properly and say, oh, you know what, you remember in that case, I actually made a mistake. Can you be open about that, or do you hide that away? That's not good if you hide away your mistakes, right? If you hide away your mistakes, if you make a video or whatever, and you're going to scrub your channel, that's not a good sign. There's some channels that are doing that. I don't know if you guys know, there are some channels right now that are facing lawsuits. Do you guys know that? I'm not going to mention their names. I'll just say that one, I won't even say that, but there's a channel right now that is facing a lawsuit. It's probably not the one that you're thinking of. That's where things have gotten to. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap up. What is the last thing I wanted to say here? The only way true crime is going to become authentic is if you care enough to notice what is and what isn't authentic. So something comes along that's not authentic. Do you care? Does it matter? So for example, this here, what this guy says, yes, it's tampered with. What she said there, this reporter got bad information, blah, blah, blah. Do you care about that, or you just go, yeah, it's bad information, doesn't really matter? You should care. We should care, because true crime is about attention to detail. We should pay attention to detail. And so if you care, show you care, follow the truth, support the truth tellers. I can tell you that probably the better truth tellers in true crime are less glitzy and sparkly and exciting, but you'll get the unvarnished, cold, hard, whole truth. And maybe if we concentrate on that and not on glitziness and sparkliness and exciting stories, if we concentrate on the cold, hard, whole truth, maybe then we'll have a real shot at real justice. Justice in these cases, justice online, and justice closer to home. Isn't that why we're here, for truth and justice? Imagine if the true crime community could be truly truthful, if the true crime community could be an asset to law enforcement, if law enforcement could turn to us and say, us, the true crime community, and say, guys, we actually need some information about that white sedan, right? Imagine that. Imagine if we were this community that law enforcement could actually approach and ask for as a resource. And I do get the feeling certain channels are kind of graduating to that point. And you see some of them interviewed by the mainstream media, like Profiling Evil and Scott Reich to an extent. but basically where you see them gain real credibility. That's a goal worth aspiring towards, I think, in the true crime space. Don't you guys agree? Jay Alspec says, what do you do with true crime psychics and tarot readers? I guess you could say there's a place for everyone. I suppose you could also make that argument. Suzanne Santos says, you're forgetting the number of people who live. Yeah. There are some people who want to escape, and it doesn't really matter if something's true or not. That is a fact. That is definitely a fact. Yvonne says, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Okay, so this is like my third live in one day. It's 3:45 in the morning. I really need to get off so I can get to bed. My dog is he always comes to me when he's like, I can't believe you're still awake. We've just done that now. Timmy, come. Come, boy. Timmy, come. Come, boy, come. Do you want to go and sleep? So Timmy's just going to quickly say goodbye. Can you see how he's got a bit of a Batman look? It looks like he's wearing a Batman mask. So anyway, so Timmy's just saying goodbye to you guys. I actually went for a very quick walk just before my first live. Timmy was a really good dog. Even though it was a very quick walk, he came when called, and I really thought he deserved a bit of a noddy badge for that. Black Widow says, my dog wants her couch too. Okay. Alison says, thank you from Australia. Love your channel. Cannot wait to be a patriot. Okay. Tomorrow says, load shedding here soon, so night. Tomorrow, thanks for joining me. It's interesting to know that there's a Dutch South African in our midst. You must let me know more about you. Where are you in the country, and are you happy here? And yeah, it would be interesting to get to know you a little bit better. So the next time you're on, tell me where you are or whatever. Jen says, have a good night. Moon Shadow says, always remember what's down in the well comes up in the bucket. Okay. Okay, SW Firefly, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining me. I hope you learned something here. I hope you found it interesting and worthwhile. And let's see what happens. Are we going to see can you see he's licking my hand? I think he loves me. I don't know if he loves the sound of my voice, but yeah. Cute, eh? You're a loving little doggy, hey? Okay, so let's see. I've got a strong feeling that this week we're going to see a major announcement this week or next week. So let's see if that does happen. Let's see if our intuition our intuitions are on track. Let's hope so. I think he is a bit sleepy. He is way cuter than me. I do realize that. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Timmy says a tongue licky good night, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot for joining me. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for your support. Make sure you share if you enjoyed this video. Remember, if you watching on replay, you can hit the thanks button, but sharing really important. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Ciao. Hey.